The king's head fell before the toast finished. Not cleanly, never cleanly in the north. It dangled by a strip of gristle and skin, spraying the white lilies crimson while his body remained upright, hands still gripping the wine cup. For 3 heartbeats, the great hall held its breath. Then 63 wolves remembered they were predators. Lyra didn't scream. She drove her thumbs into her master's eyes and opened his femoral artery with the carving knife. Pragmatism, not panic, because in the chaos of an assassination, dead owners can't give testimony. The Alpha who claimed her from the wreckage smelled like charred cedar and calculated violence. Vane of the Western Crags didn't ask if she was innocent. He asked if she was useful. The king whispered a name before he died. Lyra lied, her wrists already bruising under his grip. "I'll trade it for my life." Vane's smile was all canines. "Then you'll live long enough to prove it." She would. She'd flay the corpse herself if needed. Peel back skin to find the map tattooed on bone. Trade every secret she'd hoarded like currency. The peace treaty died with the king. Lyra intended to survive the war.
If alpha intensity, soulmate sparks, and thrilling wolf world secrets are your jam, subscribe now so you don't miss it. Fresh episodes drop every day, and the twists will have you hooked from the first howl.
Chapter 1. The Wedding of Blood. The wire caught the king mid-sentence. One moment he stood at the head table, wine cup raised, declaring 3 centuries of peace. The next, a line of red bisected his throat, thin, surgical, impossibly deep. His head tilted backward, held by vertebrae alone, and the arterial spray painted the white lilies in an arc so perfect it looked deliberate. The body stayed upright for 3 full seconds. Long enough for the nearest alphas to smell it. Long enough for the room to understand. Then chaos bloomed like blood in water. Lord Garrett's hand closed around Lyra's throat before the king's corpse hit the table. "You poured his wine," he snarled, half-shifted, fangs distending his jaw into something grotesque. His breath stank of raw meat and panic. Lyra didn't waste air on denials. She drove her thumbs into his eyes, deep, until she felt the give of ocular jelly, and when he released her, gasping, she grabbed the ceremonial carving knife from the table. Silver chased, meant for show. She opened his femoral artery with the precision of a butcher's assistant. Hot blood pulsed over her fingers. Garrett looked down at the wound, almost curious, before his legs folded. "Traitor," he whispered. "Pragmatist," Lyra corrected, and drove the blade into his heart to be certain. The great hall had become an abattoir. Alphas tore at each other in half-human forms, unable to distinguish ally from assassin in the pheromone storm. Omegas fled or fell or turned on their masters in the beautiful chaos of plausible deniability. The air tasted of copper and burning lilies. Lyra heard the king's death rattle. A wet, shapeless sound that could have been anything. A name. Curse. A plea. She filed it away, already calculating its value. The hand that caught her wrist was iron cold. Vane of the Western Crags didn't ask if she was guilty. He asked, "Can you prove you're worth keeping?" Lyra met his colorless eyes and lied without hesitation. The king spoke before he died. "I know what he said." Vane's smile was all canines. "Then you're mine now." He raised his voice over the carnage. "This Omega is claimed. Under warright, anyone who touches her answers to me." 63 predators turned to look. Some nodded. Some bared teeth. None objected. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as Vane's grip tightened, bruising her wrist where the brand had already scarred. She'd traded one master for another, but this one smelled like charred cedar and calculated violence, and she had no idea what he'd cost her. "Move," Vane said quietly, already dragging her toward the side exit. "Before someone decides you're not worth the politics." Behind them, the king's blood pooled around the fallen throne, black in the candlelight. The peace treaty was dead. Lyra's survival had just become infinitely more expensive. Chapter 2. The Map in the Skin. The king's corpse still smelled like wine. Vane had left her alone in the preparation chamber with a bucket of lye, a flensing knife, and a single instruction. Make him presentable. I don't care how. Lyra's wrists were raw where the iron manacles had chafed. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash of surviving the night. She forced them steady. Dead men didn't judge, but the Alpha watching from the doorway certainly would. She started with the neck. The garrote had severed cleanly through muscle and windpipe, leaving the spine partially exposed. Lyra worked methodically, washing away the crusted blood, her hands remembering the rhythm from 6 years of butchery. Peel back the skin. Expose the structure. Waste nothing. The discoloration caught her eye near the 4th rib. A mottled patch darker than bruising, too symmetrical to decay. She pressed her thumb against it. The texture was wrong. Thicker. Deliberate. Lyra glanced at the door. Vane's silhouette hadn't moved. She reached for the lye. The chemical hissed against flesh, eating through the outer dermis in uneven patches. The smell, caustic animal, made her eyes water. She worked quickly, scraping away dissolved tissue with the blade's edge, her lungs burning from the fumes. Beneath the king's skin, something emerged. Not a scar, not a tattoo. A map, topographical lines carved into subcutaneous tissue, raised and deliberate. The markings suggested elevation, rivers, a northern region she recognized only from whispered warnings. The Forbidden Wastes, the place where the first wolves supposedly died. The place no one returned from. Lyra's heart hammered. This wasn't decoration. This was instruction. Finished. Vane's voice cut through the silence. She turned, blocking his view of the corpse with her body. He had something hidden, under the skin. Vane crossed the room in 3 strides. His scent, charred cedar, now edged with something sharp, flooded her senses as he leaned over the body. His jaw tightened. You can read this? Enough, Lyra lied. She could read all of it. Every line. Every impossible landmark. Vane straightened, his hand closing around her jaw. Not brutal, but possessive. Then you're coming north. With my war party. If you run, I'll gut you myself. His thumb pressed against her pulse. If you lie, I'll let my pack do it. Lyra held his gaze, her mind already calculating how long she could stretch this deception. I understand, she whispered. Vane released her and turned toward the door. Good. We leave at first light. Lyra looked back at the king's flayed ribs, at the map that promised either salvation or extinction. She'd bought herself time. She just didn't know how much it would cost. Chapter 3. The Father's Dagger. Vane placed the weapon on the table between them like an accusation. The dagger was ceremonial, too ornate for battlefield work, its hilt wrapped in silver wire that would burn any true shifter who gripped it too long. But it was the seal pressed into the pommel that made Lyra's breath stop. A stylized quill crossed with a wolf's fang. Her father's mark. Pick it up, Vane said quietly. Lyra's hands didn't shake. She wouldn't allow it. She lifted the blade, feeling its perfect balance, the way it sat in her palm like it had been weighted for someone exactly her size. The metal was cold enough to ache. Her ears began to ring, a high, thin sound that meant her body was deciding whether to fight or flee. Vane pushed a folded letter across the table. The parchment was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. She recognized the handwriting before she read the words. The girl's sale must appear legitimate. 12 years of placement. When the king falls, she becomes the perfect witness. Overlooked, underestimated, positioned exactly where chaos begins. It was dated 3 months before her auction. Your father didn't abandon you, Vane said, his voice devoid of sympathy. He sold you, as cover. So when the assassination happened, No one would suspect a scholar who'd already lost everything. Lyra's vision tunneled. The dagger felt heavier now, like it wanted to fall from her grip. She thought of the 800 silver marks Lord Garrett had paid. The way her father had wept when the slavers came. The way he'd whispered, "Forgive me." As if 12-year-old Lyra could possibly understand. She'd spent 11 years believing he'd run out of options. He'd created them. Where is he? Her voice came out flat, dead. Vane leaned forward, his scent, charred cedar and stone. So overwhelming it made her nauseous. North, following the map. And you're going to help me find him. And if I refuse? Then you hang as his accomplice. Where law is simple, Lyra. Treason is inherited. His pale eyes tracked her face like a predator watching for weakness. But if you help me, I'll let you ask him why before I kill him. Lyra looked down at the dagger, at her father's seal, at the life she'd survived thinking someone somewhere had cared. When do we leave? She asked. Vane's smile was cold and satisfied. Dawn. And Lyra? He stood, his shadow swallowing the candlelight. If you're thinking of warning him, don't. I've already sent riders ahead. The door closed behind him with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid. Lyra set the dagger down carefully, her hands finally beginning to tremble. She'd spent 11 years clawing toward survival. Now she'd have to decide if revenge was worth dying for. Chapter 4. The Genetic Heresy. The prince smelled wrong. Lyra noticed it the moment he entered Vane's war camp. A sour milk undertone beneath the expensive oils and furs. Not the iron and leather musk of dominance. Not even the pine smoke of a lower-rank alpha. Something off, like meat beginning to turn. She watched him from the supply tent, half hidden behind grain sacks, as he accepted a silver chalice from one of Vane's lieutenants. A courtesy toast. Political theater. The prince's fingers blistered within seconds. He dropped the cup with a barely suppressed hiss, cradling his hand against his chest. The surrounding alphas pretended not to notice. Lyra filed it away, her mind already moving. That night, she knelt in the dirt outside her tent, using a stick to scratch lines into the frozen ground. 2 amber-eyed parents, both alpha, both supposedly pure silver blood. She drew the grid methodically, filling in the genetic possibilities the way the stolen medical text had taught her years ago. For outcomes, all identical, no brown eyes, not genetically possible. What are you doing? Vane's voice cut through the dark. Lyra didn't flinch. She'd heard his approach, smelled the charred cedar before he spoke. Proving treason, she said quietly, not looking up. The prince. He's not silver blood. He can't be. Vane crouched beside her, his shadow swallowing the makeshift diagram. Explain. She pointed to the squares with her stick. His eyes are brown. Both his parents have amber. It's impossible unless... She met Vane's gaze. Unless one of them isn't his parent. Or neither of them are true alphas. Vane's jaw tightened. That's a dangerous accusation. Test him, Lyra said. Publicly. Silver exposure. If he's pure blood, he'll tolerate it. If he's not, he'll collapse. Vane's pheromones spiked. Char and ozone. The scent of realization dawning like a blade to the throat. 3 days later, the prince stood before the assembled war council, gripping a silver-wrought ceremonial staff during the Oath of Allegiance. Lyra watched from the edge of the crowd, her pulse hammering. The prince lasted 47 seconds before his legs buckled. He hit the ground hard, his wrist snapping audibly against the frozen stone. The staff clattered away, still smoking where his palms had touched it. The silence that followed was absolute. Vane turned slowly, his colorless eyes finding Lyra through the crowd. His expression was unreadable, but his scent had changed. Darker now, edged with something that tasted like sulfur and falling kingdoms. The royal line had just bled in public. and Lyra had handed Vane the knife. Chapter 5. The Red Thaw. The screaming started during the third toast. Lyra was outside the bathhouse when the silver water hit. Close enough to hear bones crack as they boiled, far enough to survive. Duke Karen had timed it perfectly, midwinter festival, when the rival pack's leadership gathered for the ceremonial cleansing. Tradition made them vulnerable. Trust made them dead. The smell reached her first. Cooked meat and molten metal, sweet and caustic, choking the frozen air. Then the door burst open and a half-shifted Alpha staggered out. His skin sloughing off in sheets, silver residue eating through muscle to bone. He collapsed 3 steps from the threshold, steam rising from his corpse. 37 didn't make it past the door. Vane found her behind the stables an hour later, emptying her stomach into the snow. He didn't offer comfort. He offered a shovel. "The bodies burn tonight," he said flatly. "The records say it was a structural collapse. Faulty pipes. You were never here." Lyra wiped her mouth, her hands still shaking. "Karen is a hero who tried to save them." Vane's pale eyes were merciless. "That's the story. Learn it." She learned it with her hands. Dragging corpses, some still warm, some fused together by silver burns, into the pyre Vane's men built in the woods. The fat rendered slowly, thick and black, coating her arms to the elbow. She worked methodically, her mind fracturing into the rhythm. Lift, drag, burn, repeat. Vane watched from the tree-lean, his expression carved from stone. By dawn, the bathhouse was rubble. The records showed 40 gold marks paid for urgent repairs. The rival pack mourned their fallen, never knowing it was murder dressed as tragedy. Duke Karen appeared at the memorial, weeping openly. 3 days later, he cornered Lyra in the grain storage. "I know you helped cover it," he hissed, his breath reeking of wine and desperation. "One word to the council." Vane's blade opened his throat before he finished. The Duke hit the ground gurgling, his blood pooling between the sacks. Vane cleaned his knife on Karen's cloak, then looked at Lyra with something almost like approval. "Justice for the fallen," he announced to the guards who arrived seconds later, their timing too perfect to be coincidence. The Duke confessed to sabotage. War law demanded execution. No one questioned it. Lyra stared at Karen's corpse, at the man who'd advocated for Omega rights until it became inconvenient, until survival required different math. Vane's hand settled on her shoulder, not comfort, but possession. "You understand now," he said quietly. "Heroism is just another way to die." Lyra nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She understood perfectly. In this war, only pragmatists lived long enough to regret it. Chapter 6. The Primordial Shift. The arrows came from 3 directions at once. Vane shoved Lyra sideways as the first shaft whistled past her ear, embedding itself in a pine trunk with a wet thunk. She hit the snow hard, the impact driving air from her lungs. Around them, the frozen woods erupted with movement. Shadows peeling away from trees, blades catching moonlight like broken glass. 8 assassins. Maybe more. Vane shifted mid-lunge, his bones cracking as he met the first attacker in a collision of flesh and fur. Lyra scrambled backward, her manacled hands useless, her breath misting in the frigid air. A blade sang toward her throat. She twisted, felt the edge catch her collar. The silver band she'd worn for 8 years, and the metal shattered. Not bent, not broke, shattered, like glass under a hammer, the fragments scattering across the snow in a spray of moonlit shrapnel. The cold hit her first, then the heat. Her body convulsed, every nerve igniting at once. The suppressants, 8 years of chemical shackles, burned away in seconds, and what surged up to replace them was ancient. Lyra's spine arched, vertebrae separating and elongating with sounds like green wood splitting. Her scream became a howl, then something lower, resonant, that made the trees shiver. Her bones didn't just grow, they changed. Cartilage reformed into structures that had no name in human anatomy. Her skin stretched translucent, revealing musculature that glowed faintly beneath. Not fur, but something crystalline, refracting moonlight into fractured rainbows. Her hands elongated into talons that could grip stone. Her jaw distended, teeth sharpening into interlocking razors. She wasn't a wolf. She was what wolves remembered in their nightmares. The nearest assassin died before he could scream. Lyra's jaws closed around his throat, crushing through leather and chainmail like parchment, the hot copper taste of blood flooding her mouth. She moved on instinct, no thought, only hunger and the crystalline clarity of apex predation. Armor meant nothing. Steel meant nothing. She tore through them like they were made of wet paper. When the last body hit the ground, the forest fell silent except for her breathing, deep, rattling steam rising from her translucent form in the moonlight. Slowly, agonizingly, her bones began to contract. The crystalline fur dissolved into pale human skin. She collapsed into the snow, naked and shaking, her hands still stained red to the wrists. Vane stood 10 feet away, half-shifted, his chest heaving. His scent had changed. Char and cedar, yes, but underneath it something primal. Fear. Awe. Recognition. He stared at her like he'd never seen her before. "What are you?" he whispered. Lyra looked up at him through tangled hair, blood cooling on her lips, her body still trembling from the transformation's aftermath. "The truth," she said hoarsely. "The thing you've spent 3 centuries trying to erase." Vane's pale eyes reflected the moonlight, wide and calculating and hungry. "Show me again," he breathed, and Lyra realized with cold certainty. She just made herself the most dangerous weapon in the north, or the most valuable target. Chapter 2. The map in the skin. The king's corpse still smelled like wine. Vane had left her alone in the preparation chamber with a bucket of lye, a flensing knife, and a single instruction. "Make him presentable. I don't care how." Lyra's wrists were raw where the iron manacles had chafed. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash of surviving the night. She forced them steady. Dead men didn't judge, but the Alpha watching from the doorway certainly would. She started with the neck. The garrote had severed cleanly through muscle and windpipe, leaving the spine partially exposed. Lyra worked methodically, washing away the crusted blood, her hands remembering the rhythm from 6 years of butchery. Peel back the skin. Expose the structure. Waste nothing. The discoloration caught her eye near the 4th rib, a mottled patch darker than bruising, too symmetrical to decay. She pressed her thumb against it. The texture was wrong. Thicker. Deliberate. Lyra glanced at the door. Vane's silhouette hadn't moved. She reached for the lye. The chemical hissed against flesh, eating through the outer dermis in uneven patches. The smell, caustic animal, made her eyes water. She worked quickly, scraping away dissolved tissue with the blade's edge, her lungs burning from the fumes. Beneath the king's skin, something emerged. Not a scar, not a tattoo. A map, topographical lines carved into subcutaneous tissue, raised and deliberate. The markings suggested elevation, rivers, a northern region she recognized only from whispered warnings. The Forbidden Wastes, the place where the first wolves supposedly died. The place no one returned from. Lyra's heart hammered. This wasn't decoration. This was instruction. Finished. Vane's voice cut through the silence. She turned, blocking his view of the corpse with her body. He had something hidden, under the skin. Vane crossed the room in 3 strides. His scent, charred cedar, now edged with something sharp, flooded her senses as he leaned over the body. His jaw tightened. "You can read this?" "Enough," Lyra lied. She could read all of it. Every line. Every impossible landmark. Vane straightened, his hand closing around her jaw. Not brutal, but possessive. Then you're coming north. With my war party. If you run, I'll gut you myself. His thumb pressed against her pulse. If you lie, I'll let my pack do it. Lyra held his gaze, her mind already calculating how long she could stretch this deception. I understand, she whispered. Vane released her and turned toward the door. Good. We leave at first light. Lyra looked back at the king's flayed ribs, at the map that promised either salvation or extinction. She'd bought herself time. She just didn't know how much it would cost. Chapter 8. The Divine Erasure. The horizon hummed. Lyra felt it before she saw it. A vibration in her bones that had nothing to do with the lunar cycle. A pressure behind her eyes like the world was holding its breath. Then the eastern sea split open and the ships rose. Not ships, vessels. Geometric and impossible. Their surfaces reflecting light that hadn't existed moments before. They didn't sail. They existed, occupying space the way a knife occupies flesh. Invasive, deliberate, wrong. Vane's hand tightened on her shoulder. What are they? Lyra's mouth was too dry to answer. She could smell ozone and something sterile, clinical, like the air before lightning strikes. The sentinels had come. They found Orin in the ruins of the source, kneeling before a stone altar carved with symbols Lyra recognized from her stolen medical text. He looked smaller than she remembered, gray-haired, hollow-cheeked, his scholar's hands trembling as he clutched a parchment covered in calculations. Lyra! His voice cracked when he saw her. You survived. Thank the gods you called them. Her words came out flat, dead. The sentinels. You brought them here. Orin's eyes filled with tears. I had to. The silver bloods. Their theft of magic is killing the world. The genetics are corrupting, spreading. I thought. He gestured at the ships hovering on the horizon. I thought the gods would fix it. Restore balance. I didn't know they'd erase everything, Lyra finished. She stepped closer, a silver blade appearing in her hand as if summoned. You didn't save the world, Father. You condemned it. Please. Orin reached for her, his scent. Old paper and desperate regret. Overwhelming. Let them reset it. Start over. Clean. Pure. The way it was meant to. Lyra's blade found his heart before he finished. She held him as he died, feeling the warmth of his blood seep through her fingers, the way his breath stuttered and stopped. His eyes stayed open, confused, like he couldn't understand why his daughter had become the thing he'd tried to prevent. You don't get to decide who survives, she whispered against his cooling temple. Behind her, the sentinel's ships descended, their hum intensifying until her teeth ached. Vane moved to her side, his scent sharp with readiness, with the understanding that they were facing something older than gods, older than lies. Lyra straightened, her father's blood still warm on her hands, and turned to face the beings who had come to judge them. The lead sentinel manifested like light condensing into form, vaguely humanoid, its edges blurred, its voice resonating inside her skull rather than her ears. The genetic corruption must be purged. This world will be sanitized. Lyra met its eyeless gaze, her jaw set, her god-beast form stirring beneath her skin like a promise. Try, she said, and the world held its breath before the final war began. Chapter 9. The Final Stand. The lunar throne burned. Not with fire, with bodies. The siege had turned the capital's ruins into an abattoir. Low-born Omegas and disillusioned Alphas clashing against the royal army in a grinding war of attrition. Lyra fought in her god-beast form, her crystalline fur slick with blood, moonlight refracting through her like shattered glass. She was beautiful. She was terrible. She was winning. Vane fought beside her in his half-shifted form, his scent, charred cedar and ozone, mixing with hers until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. They moved like a single organism, predicting each other's strikes, covering weaknesses with brutal efficiency. The royal prince made his stand on the throne steps, surrounded by his last dozen guards. He was screaming orders when the Omega child stepped forward, a girl no older than 10, her left wrist branded with his personal seal. She drove a silver spike through his eye. The prince's scream died as he toppled backward, his skull cracking against the ancient stone. The girl didn't flinch. She just retrieved her weapon and rejoined the line, her face empty of everything except survival. Lyra felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Then the sky opened. The Sentinel's ship descended like a falling star, humming with energy that made Lyra's teeth ache. The battlefield froze. Humans, shifters, even the dying, all stared upward at the beings who had come to erase them. Lyra shifted fully, her bones elongating into the primordial form, and roared. The sound shattered windows 3 streets away. It was the voice of extinct gods, of apex predators who had walked this world before humans learned to make fire. The Sentinel's ship held position for 37 seconds, scanning, analyzing, recognizing. Then it rose and left. The silence that followed felt apocalyptic. Lyra returned to human form on the throne steps, naked and shaking, Vane's cloak settling around her shoulders before she could ask. Around them, the coalition, bloodied, broken, alive, began to kneel. "No," Lyra said hoarsely. She climbed the steps to the throne itself, a massive chair carved from a wolf god's femur, worn smooth by 3 centuries of lies. No more kneeling, no more firstborn rule, no more divine right. She sat, feeling the bones cold seep through her skin. "A council," she continued, her voice strengthening. "Omegas and Alphas, governed by truth, not bloodlines." She met Vane's pale eyes. "Agreed." He nodded slowly, blood dripping from a gash across his temple. "Agreed," the coalition murmured, uncertain, exhausted, but hopeful in a way that felt dangerous. Hours later, when the last body had been cleared and the first fires began to die, Lyra and Vane stood alone in the empty throne room. The silence after centuries of screaming felt fragile, like glass about to break. Lyra looked at the throne, at the blood staining its ancient bone, at the kingdom she'd never wanted. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. Vane's hand found hers, scarred, steady, still warm with someone else's blood. "Ask me in 100 years. Lyra's lips twitched, almost a smile, almost. Outside, the first dawn of the new world broke over the ruins. And for the first time in 300 years, no one knew what came next.